buddy, can you hear me?
God's sake.
If you're talking, I can't hear you. You've got to press the button on the side of the receiver.
I'm not talking. I was hoping you'd go away. But God hates me, so... whatever. Yep, I'm here. What's up?
Hey, evening. Just had something flagged to me that's important. Your van's in the area, right?
Just driving around? What's the word?
You know that nut job over on 4th? The guy who makes those videos thinks he's a dog?
Rings a bell.
Yeah, well, word is he's gone AWOL. The guy didn't leave his office for a week straight and then threw himself out his window. No one's caught a glimpse of him since, but apparently there's a drive with a bunch of his videos sitting inside. I got a couple of fellas looking to pay decent money to use them as AI training footage. Get over there, snatch it, and get out. Simple repossession job.
Uh-huh. I'm on it.
Just a heads up that apparently someone is still moving around inside. The office has been closed the last few days, so it must be one of the cleaners working late or something. Just try to keep it subtle, alright?
Keep it subtle. You got it. Office. Ah, here it is. Guy's all off on his lonesome. Let's take a look here, shall we? No one's around. The longer I'm doing this, the less odd jobs I'll be asked to do. No harm in taking a peek, right? Alrighty, let's see what this weird bastard had cooked up for us this time.
Hello, dear viewer. This hurts me more than it does you. Today's topic: hatred. The internet is funded and maintained by an intricate economy of haters. For those made blissfully ignorant by the joy in their heart, hating is a practice predominantly centered in digital spaces in which individuals regard a miscellaneous object, phenomenon, or entity with potent disdain. You dumb cunt! It says a lot about the nature of social media that this has become such a common practice. It appeals to our desperate need to distract ourselves while the world around us continues to collapse, decay, and deprecate. Born too late to see the towers fall. Born too early to have sex with robots, but born just in time for another war in the Middle East. But me, dear viewer, I'm a man of peace. I do not denigrate myself by arguing with cretins who shape their opinions based on what their favourite loathsome pillock has told them to regurgitate. I'm contented to sit on the sidelines, observing the chaos of this international forum we call home, and curating my own slice of digital existence. But life isn't fair, dear viewer. I may be a man of peace, but what comes next was not ordained by me. No, this was outright instigated. You see, one day I was watching my personal goat, FreeFS. This man, to me, is one of the funniest Let's Play channels to exist on the platform right now. The jokes, the edits, the insane facial expressions, he simply got it all. Having been an avid viewer for the last few months, I was one of the first to watch him play through the release of a new, highly anticipated horror game. By the halfway point, I was overcome with rage. Look what they are doing to my man Maximilian. An attack on Maximus is an attack on Zoomers everywhere. It's an attack on me. I will not have my goat's honor desecrated by something as lowly as the secret of the Mimic. The Secret of the Mimic is a Five Nights at Freddy's installment where you, the player, sweep through the abandoned halls of a once bustling animatronic factory to locate coveted schematics for an elusive robot configuration, all the while hunted by a mechanical marauder in a variety of funky suits. I am not one to partake in hating often, and even less so do I involve myself in discussing games of the Mascot horror genre, a category of media that holds all the narrative significance of a condom at an abortion clinic. The one tangible feeling I have just seeing titles in this catalogue be played is general displeasure. Anything that held a semblance of value once upon a time has now been milked enough to cause catastrophic disfigurement of what people used to regard with affection. How fitting to discuss Five Nights at Freddy's, a title that aided in both the birth and death of this bloated category that I sincerely believe continues as a tacit method on behalf of Scott Cawthon to keep funneling funds to the Trump administration. Watching this game be played by numerous high-profile channels, scrolling through countless Steam reviews and looking myself in a mirror to ask if this is really what I want to spend my time on, I've taken this holy mission upon myself to elaborate on what exactly about this game makes me want to break something. All of this is done in the hope that maybe, just maybe, we will acquiesce to the unanimous conclusion that we're all getting a little bit tired of this shit. So sit back, crank that Soldier Boy, and wonder where it all went wrong for a titan of the genre. Because I'm about to explain why the secret of the mimic just doesn't work. Upon the thought of making this video crossing my mind, I knew I would be entrenched in a war on two fronts. To my left, the FNAF fandom, a community devoted to the consumption of Scott Cawthon's flagship franchise who, halfway through writing their erotic fanfiction of Mike Schmidt and Purple Guy playing with each other's spring locks, have stopped what they are doing to bite my frontal lobe out. To my right, my own subscriber base, a gaggle of miscreants and misfits devoted to issuing vague threats towards me in the comments who now, upon realizing I'm deadly serious about covering a FNAF title, are ready to make said threats a reality. Both sides, contrasted by their opposing perspectives on this franchise, are united by a single question towards me. Why the fuck are you wasting our time with this? That is a very fair question. FNAF, being the cornerstone of popular horror nowadays, has already been the subject of countless video essays dissecting its artistic value as a game, comedic value as a meme, and cultural value as an inspiration for a whole catalogue of Foxy the Pirate's furry porn since the dawn of human civilization. Whatever could have been novel to say about it years ago has already been said innumerable times by many others, so making a video on any piece of its constantly expanding tome of nonsense lacks any novelty or fun in doing so. I also, per my own fictional tastes, don't particularly care for it. For many of us, FNAF has always been an entity of vicarious consumption. Any affection I've ever had for it was afforded through the morbid thrill of watching the likes of 8-Bit Ryan, Jacksepticeye, Corey Kenshin, and Markiplier suffer fatal seizures from jump scares.
Usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through.
The one time I've ever personally mentioned it was during my Soma video 3 years ago, where I took the liberty of spit roasting Security Breach over an open flame for being unable to achieve what games 10 years ago had managed in a horror genre. In the last 4 years since I started making video essays, I have never felt anything close to a meaningful compulsion to focus my sights on this. With that in mind, why wouldn't I just focus on something else? What finally summoned a motivation to cover this game, which I'll refer to as Mimic Secret from here on out, is the madness I felt looking at reviews of it. After numerous playthroughs where I watched all enjoyment steadily drain from the faces of the people playing, to see it awarded a very positive rating on Steam felt like a slap in the face. Seeing the significant minority of negative reviews anchored me to sanity. Faced by a tide of blue thumbs mindlessly praising the bare minimum, I finally saw an opening, the opportunity to say something novel about a topical new release that both regular viewers and FNAF loyalists can appreciate in their own right. I make this video with the genuine hope my usual audience, people like me who don't particularly care for FNAF, can derive enjoyment from the discussion of wider principles of game design related to the fumbling of Mimic Secret. Even more so, I think this video will be especially worthwhile for fans of the series. It's pretty apparent that even for those who liked Mimic Secret, the game wasn't without issue, nor did it hold any value remotely close to the price tag they dared to append to it. It can be a little ambiguous to grasp exactly why that was, especially when there isn't much incentive to waste even more time replaying it to learn why, which is where I come into the equation. Swiping a copy off a high seas, I managed to sidestep the loathsome pitfall of surrendering £33.50 for diminishing returns, only to realise the snare right behind it was unavoidable. I may not be bereft of money, but I am bereft of time, and let me tell you, even though this is a purely self-inflicted venture, I'm not particularly fucking happy about it. When you hear the term FNAF, What comes to mind? The animatronics getting a little quirky at night? Being skill issued by a rabbit with a guitar? Pyrocynical unsurprisingly wanting to have sex with the overweight roller skating chicken. I must be a Pyrocynical clone at this point because, man, I'm suddenly hankering for some poultry. The most likely answer of all these is bugs.
To parts and services, and I'm gonna shove a beak inside of you, and you are going to be able to talk better.
Fuck you!
Did you hate the idea that much?
Confounding little critters that interfere with the game's design to prevent a player from progressing forward. This became a relevant concern regarding Steel Wool's flagship title, Security Breach. This game was so unbelievably broken that Markiplier's Let's Play became a definitive source to catalogue the immense number of faults it had. It's not totally surprising to then see a slew of reviews of Mimic Secret detailing personal anecdotes of frustrating softlocks and bizarre happenings that jeopardize the whole package. Vigilance on something like this matters. The magnificence of creative concepts is irrelevant if you can't work the medium to convey them successfully on a technical level. It's like shooting a film with a lens cap on or letting extra tuner near music software. Thing is, Security Breach became so irrefutably synonymous with a reputation of being an unplayable mess because so many channels with huge audiences covered a highly anticipated release in what was considered a new era of the franchise. Mimic Secret, admittedly, is far less egregious, and evidence of its technical missteps aren't nearly as viral. In my eyes, it's a moot point to argue this. I don't doubt people have experienced softlocks or frame drops, but there are simply too many loyal players who didn't have those experiences for it to matter. They are outliers that serve to award an additional line of defense to Mimic Secret. If you dislike it, you clearly just have a low-end setup you're embarrassed to admit cucked you from enjoying the game. But I'm no mere cuck, dear viewer. I wield the girth of a 4070 Ti, a 16-core i7, and 32GB of RAM. This baby is purpose-built to endure the worst Steel Wool have to offer. Aside from the occasional stutter when crossing areas and the bashful nature of textures causing them to hesitate to load in even when I'm right next to them. What the fuck's going on here? I encountered no debilitating bugs that opponents can claim soured my enjoyment. I see clearly, dear viewer, and my vision remained astute enough to discern this curious happening. Bro is just hanging out. Alright, interesting. That's very interesting. He is just... What? Did you see it? One moment he's there, and the next, he's gone. It seems whoever made this damnable thing has been tinkering with teleportation technology. But more than that, this opens an interesting and meaningful avenue. I don't think Mimic Secret doesn't work because it doesn't run correctly, so I can't engage the intended experience. I think it doesn't work because, even when it runs right, it's not particularly fun to play. Upon hitting 10k, I realised the important obligation I needed to see to, the inevitable obstacle of a YouTuber apology regarding the nebulous allegations. Don't look so frightened, dear viewer. I'm morally opposed to crypto, so I haven't scammed anyone, and look at me, I'm a harmless virgin, so whatever Tectone and his dad have done is physically impossible for me. No, this apology concerns disparaging comments made about a relevant topic. Alien isolation. Part and parcel with human existence, you know. Oh my fuck! In my Lethal Company video, I admonished the game for arbitrarily deciding to kill me and thereby harshening my overall opinion of it. This was because I was playing on easy mode with the foolish assumption that Alien was blind, meaning the times it didn't see me played into an unknown confirmation bias I had, that it actually was in fact blind, so that when it randomly beelined for my location, I believed it was because the game's AI was unfairly overtuned for the sake of random challenge, and not for reality that I was sitting in the middle of an open corridor like an embarrassing dumbass. For that, I am deeply sorry, and it's through passionate intercourse with your mother I seek to make amends. Before the Rubric rumble occurs, let's delve into why I've brought this up. A lot of different titles are invoked during discussions of Mimic Secret regarding inspirations for the style of gameplay it uses. A very popular derogatory comparison is Poppy Playtime, a title with its own cans of worms stacked high atop each other, and I can see why this one is stuck. The premises of many horror and survival horror titles overlap considerably. You turn up to a bad place and within minutes of arriving you realise the vibe is whack and you want to dip. To your dismay, the antagonists of said bad place do not consent to your regress and do everything they can to ensure you stay forever as a mutilated corpse. This is true of Poppy Playtime, and gameplay elements of both this and Mimic Secret bear some resemblance, but I think an even better comparison would be Alien Isolation. This is also a game abiding by the same general premise, but it's made more similar by some details. Both games feature a technician protagonist to contextually justify the in-game interactions with machinery and equipment to progress the story, while also having both protagonist hunted by an elusive lone predator, established as a cunning foe you can't fight back against. Of course, Alien Isolation is not unique for centering the conflict on a single antagonist. What set it apart from its contemporaries, and evidently continues to set it apart over a decade later, is how the Xenomorph's presence was established through gameplay. While most other games used enemies following static patrol routes who then would deviate to give chase to a detected player, the Alien was dynamic. It adapted to a player's approaches. It waited to ambush you in vents, ignored distraction devices when overused, and would relentlessly pursue you when spotted.
Well, I'll go fuck myself, man.
The gameplay established the Xenomorph as the cunning killer the story said it to be, aligning the player's experience with the narrative. The core gameplay loop of Mimic Secret emulates a similar experience. Unfortunately, as you likely guessed from the video's title, I feel it takes a leap that it fails to ever stick the landing to. An important thing about Alien Isolation was that the Xenomorph was constantly present even when it wasn't, aside from annoying clashes with human bandits on the station that existed for the express purpose of making me put a hole in the drywall.
I'm literally... You fucking idiots. Now we're all dead. And you go... I'm getting really sick of you!
You were often on your own and free to backtrack to earlier areas so you could use advanced tools you found along the way to gain access to locked zones. However, emitting noise by firing a gun, sprinting randomly, or setting off distractions risked summoning the Xenomorph into the area. Because the Xenomorph was so deadly and close proximity was so stressful, players would continue to behave as if the alien was in the area even when the coast was clear. There was tense uncertainty. You were constantly checking over your shoulder in fear the Xenomorph returned without you realizing it. The idea it was a relentless and intelligent hunter was also founded on the fact it would arrive after you did, summoned there by commotion that initiated the confrontation. Its presence was a response to credible cues that prey was in the area, and its failure to find you for a long duration would send it back into the vents to wait an ambush. The Mimic, the titular character of this tale and 40% of the title, does not do the same. The Mimic isn't an individual entity that crawls into suits, but really the suits it supposedly crawls into are all available spawn points it can use to enter the area as different models. It creates the illusion it was lying in wait to attack you. That clip before where bro was just chilling and then disappeared illuminates this being the case. Judging by how it despawns and then respawns right beneath me though, is where the problem arises. Subsequent returns to the workshop area would have random animatronics closest to the path I was taking from the door activate. This means the Mimic's encounters are tangibly scripted. Even though the suits it picks are randomized to an extent, it will only activate in designated areas to serve as an obstacle for you to progress or backtrack. This became even more obvious when, during my first foray into the workshop, an elephant costume materialized out of thin air and began to pursue me. This was obviously not intentional, seemingly little is in the new FNAF era, but it proves what I'm talking about here. What the game touts as a constant looming and dynamic presence to create tension is actually incredibly limited. Because it doesn't go into hiding, arriving and departing when needed, it doesn't feel like you're being stalked by an observant and deceptive mechanical killer. It doesn't use a suit far away from the player to lie in wait and ambush them when they pass, nor does it use suits previously passed by in areas like the security office hub to use a false sense of security against the player either. It is very easy to tell when you can relax and when you have to pay attention. During an encounter with the chubby roller skating chicken in the warehouse, sometimes it just vanished. This happened for a couple other Let's Players too, and it never did that before, so obviously it was Steelwall's patented coding prowess at play. When this happens, without fail, every player just runs into the open without fear, because they know there's no risk of it ambushing them from another suit. When it's gone, and so is the notion this thing is an intelligent stalker. As much as the Xenomorph retreating into a lurking state created a constant tension that it could come back at any time, it also made sense. It's an attentive hunter. If it can't find you, it reasonably assumes you're going to be elsewhere and leaves. The supposed intelligence of a Mimic is undermined by its insistence to remain in the area, lumbering around searching the same few corners without switching strategy or setting traps. The fact it is often there before you also undermines the idea it is following you or trying to observe your movements, another casualty of its failure to transition in and out of the encounter. Functionally, across the board, it feels less like you're being stalked by an elusive lone predator, and more that you're searching for an escape through chambers inhabited by roaming rogue robots, a comparatively less interesting premise lacking any of the desired fright that one would expect from a game insisting it's part of the horror genre. What baffles me more than this, however, is that even right out of the gate, the game doesn't give you a chance to discover this for yourself. In other games, you are given the opportunity opportunity to encounter the threat first and learn the hard way you're not alone. Even though it's expected, it's frightening to stumble into the antagonist for the first time and have to navigate your own uncertainty to grasp how it works and use that information to survive. Having to learn the hard way the Mimic can use any suit at any time to catch you unaware would actually be a very stressful introduction and set a good first impression revering the cunning approach of the robot. The little tension earned from your arrival to the eerily quiet factory is immediately killed by your dispatch, who immediately reveals not just that there's a killer robot on the loose nearby, but also spoils its main gimmick before you've even seen it for yourself.
He was working on an endoskeleton that can adapt to any costume or character, large or small, with the ability to take on the persona of the character it occupies. But in the meantime, just try to be quiet, careful, and focused on the task at hand. Always being mindful of the fact that this entity could potentially be inside any costume or character that you see.
Look, I get it. We all watched The Secret of the Mimic song. We all know that it was difficult to put the pieces together. So I'm not saying that I didn't have an inkling as to the sort of antics something called the Mimic was going to get up to. That being said, this is a glaring violation of show don't tell. Why did they feel it necessary to exposit this to me and not let me watch the antagonist's introduction that plays only a couple minutes later? I'm also not a major fan of how the Mimic is introduced here. When you first encounter the Mimic, it launches out from a sealed box. I had doubts as to how exactly it would get in there without showing it was already open, but the area is blacked out before the power's on, even at the highest brightness setting, so, being charitable, there's every chance it climbed into an empty box and held the lid shut before ambushing you. However, the Mimic does make a cheeky little appearance after you complete the power puzzle, which occurs before you encounter it officially.
Huh? Am I thinking about you while touching myself?
I think not only does this play the game's hand so incredibly fast that something's in there with you, further diminishing any tension, I think it also makes it kind of goofy. So this killer mechanical Mimic, who we see later has very little restraint and needs no real reason to wreck shit, has our protagonist cornered in a room with one sole point of entry. This motherfucker is insanely endurable. It crawls out from a vat of burning magma to continue chasing you. So you're telling me this thing that is hell-bent on doing whatever it can to kill intruders in the factory is foiled by a glass window. It creates a terrible inconsistency for what exactly the Mimic's deal is as a narrative force in the story, which will be better examined later, trust me, but even in isolation I think it just doesn't work. Its arrival lacks presence, menace, dread, or any real sense of fright. Turns out relegating the construction of meaningful tension to an audiobook doesn't do much to enhance the experience. It baffled me for a hot minute that Steel Wool thought that this was an effective execution of the concept. Right at the start of the game, they've already played their hands so early for almost no meaningful impact. But then I realised potentially why this was. According to the credits, the game was playtested. Supposedly. How they didn't catch the Mimic despawning in front of their eyes is quite amusing. I guess they all fell asleep around the same time. So what I assume happened was Steel Wool realised through testing that players didn't feel there was one animatronic using the suits of countless others to tirelessly hunt them down. It dawned on them that, functionally, there was no evidence in gameplay to establish the presence of a lone killer and satisfyingly convey that to the player. So, in order to ensure everyone was on the same page, they included this exposition dump here so no one could misconstrue the Mimic as just being random animatronics strewn throughout the facility. To reiterate, without this monologue at the start of the game, as part of a bizarre decision by Steel Wool to disregard any tension that could have been accrued up until this point, there would be nothing in the gameplay to denote the reoccurring appearance of a relentless hunter that justifies not only 40% of its title, but also the significant chunk of its exorbitant price tag. And dear viewer, let me tell you, this wasn't even the blunder that made me want to make the video. There's a point in the game where you climb into an elevator and conduct a maintenance check as part of what is functionally a Simon Says puzzle. This is the second of two instances where you have to do this, and failure to follow exact instructions has you crushed by an elevator or slam dunked into the bottom of an elevator shaft. At one point, the Mimic drops onto the top of the elevator and tries to force its way inside. The silence stretches out, where the realization dawns on you that you need to repeat the instructions to accelerate the lift's speed to crush the animatronic against the top of the shaft. Potentially, the sudden arrival of the mimic would surprise you, causing you to forget one of the steps, and this could then become a stressful moment where you have to make educated guesses about what to do under the duress of an attack from above. It's not a long moment, nor would it suddenly make Mimic Secret outstanding, but it would be something of note. As per usual, however, Steel Wool does not fuck with good game design. So really, I watched this simple moment of gameplay be snatched away by the voice returning to recite exactly what you needed to do in that moment to beat the encounter. Regardless of your allegiance to Freddy Fazbear and his reign of terror on the internet, there is simply no way you can convince anyone with ongoing brain function that this was a good design choice. It is almost artful watching Steel Wool set up a tense moment of gameplay just to then knock it all down in mere seconds. A fumble as bad as this hasn't occurred since the Hello Neighbor developer got aired by MatPat and then made the most uninteresting game alpha known to mankind. This cow has got no more cash to milk, Tiny Build. This is now just animal abuse. Scenarios such as this elevator sequence are not uncommon. The complaints regarding them are no more infrequent. Personally, having suffered the taint of Freddy Fazbear long enough, I believe the sin perceived here by many has as much to do with the lackluster gameplay as it does the fact it serves as a pockmark of a loathsome genre's looming presence. Mascot horror. If you've ever asked yourself why so many game developers flock to the horror genre, the answer is rather simple. It's one of the easiest. Many horror games even now are at their core walking simulators. This means developers don't have to account as much for the many different choices players can make and suffer through balancing around it. Aspects of the game relating to artistic presentation, sound design and storytelling, elements that can't be interacted with directly by the player, can then serve to carry the experience forward. Whilst not the most mechanically impressive, there is a reason a very linear game like Soma is treasured so fondly by a dedicated minority of players. Even now, these linear horror titles generate massive buzz online. Bad Parenting, despite it being a lot of walking and talking, endeared itself through its morbid retelling of abuse. The developer and recipient of the aforementioned massive buzz online then decided to turn the game into an ARG by attempting to also abuse a child. Some things simply never change, do they? This is not to say horror games are without mechanical complexity. The survival horror genre shoulders a lot of that development burden. A game like Signalis doesn't just have to account for the artful creation of a bleak dystopia, but also the availability of resources and the difficulty of enemies, so that ostensible challenge is provided without proving unfair and taking players out of the moment. I was going to ask what sort of drugs the developers of Darkwood were taking to endure the horrors of developing such a brute, but I think I already know the answer. I give these examples to point out the great potential the horror genre has. It's an equal playing field where even the flashiest of new releases in the mainstream industry can be matched by independent projects developed by lone creators. Some of the greatest experiences and corresponding tales are possible through a good grasp of storytelling and a keen understanding of meaningful sound design. The boons of a lower barrier to entry and greater accessibility are not to be understated, but we shouldn't neglect to mention the one major downside that has come with this proliferation of linear horror games: mascot horror.
You're terrible!
If you've ever had the misfortune of suffering through a particularly bothersome sickness or infection, congratulations, you've played a mascot horror game. These things are a dime a dozen, much like many bodily infections, and they exist with the sole cynical purpose of appealing to a trend and suctioning as much money as they can from it as possible. It is a genre emblematic of a perspective lacking sincere care for a craft nor adherence to any form of spinal integrity. It defines a mad desperation for relevancy as well as the money relevancy garners, creating a contemptible genre of digital get-rich-quick schemes. You've likely cottoned on that a section with this scathing an introduction being included in a video on a FNAF game doesn't bode particularly well for its franchise or its creators. Mascot horror games alternate between three gameplay styles: puzzles, enemies, and puzzles with enemies. More games than just Mimic Secret abide by these objectives, like Soma and Alien Isolation, but where it differs is the failure to integrate them well into the gameplay that's become a staple of the loathsome genre it occupies. As opposed to its puzzles being used to augment something that already existed, it feels pretty obvious these tasks you're given are for the purpose of padding the timeout. Classics such as the generic Activate the Generator are distinguished solely by the fact you have to align pipes that courier flowing magma from one end to the other. Sometimes a piece is missing, meaning you have to search for area nearby while the mimic hunts you down, but otherwise it's pretty standard. If anything, this is the lesser of its sins. The Big Top Carnival section was a bona fide waste of time. Play a carnival game, sneak around the Big Top Sentry, do the electrical puzzle, repeat 3 times. Even the circus master found this boring because he fucking left. The gameplay revolves around you mashing left mouse button for a majority of this area. For a significant chunk of the game, these sections bloat Mimic Secret out of any reasonable proportion. There's one particularly painful segment where you hop in a spring-lock suit and descend into the theatre box to oversee a newfangled invention by the factory's owner, Edwin Murray. It is a creative suite that lets you film and present puppet performances without need for any actors, directors, or exorbitant production costs. Damn, my man already invented generative AI in the 1970s, cause this shit sucks ass. It's a real credit to Mimic Secret that they made the player's own displeasure diegetic to the world they're in.
Oh, shut up with the goddamn music, I hate you!
What follows is a mindless few-minute stretch of mashing left mouse button on targets to advance the story while the puppets rise into your theatre box to attack you. These things supposedly can also kill you, apparently by caving your skull in with the weight of that gameplay contrivance. There's an argument to be made that these sections are as much about the gameplay as they are world building. They elaborate on the developments of the elusive Edwin Murray and display to the player the application these animatronic creations would have to the real world. I'd maybe willing to give that to the carnival, as uninteresting as it is to play through, but that is just not even true of this theatre section. You have targets appearing on stage, off stage, in the air, in the row of seats to the right. I have absolutely no clue why I'm doing this, and even less idea what the diegetic reason is for how this would work. I'm obviously not alone in this, because you can watch any other channel go through this section, and you'll see their face oscillate between expressions of confusion and complete utter boredom. When I mention being pockmarked by the evils of a Mascot horror genre, this is what I mean. It's gameplay elements and sections that are completely peripheral to the construction of any horror or fright solely included because they're easier to develop and create the illusion you're getting more of your money's worth. It's the thought of playing Alien Isolation or Soma and thinking at any point that the tense gameplay would be greatly improved by the introduction of Furry Aim Trainer. These problems of the game's design are also incredibly infuriating because I think if Steelwall arranged the game better, it could cover these shortcomings quite well. There are some areas in the New Game Plus section, like this claustrophobic maze where you can hear a moon animatronic hunting you down, that are more conducive to what I'd expect from a horror game that may actually be fun to play. The sin, though, is that they scattered these few moments of meaningful gameplay across at least a few hours of linear chase sequences, random puzzles, and mashing left mouse button. It doesn't do anything to invest the player in wanting to play long enough to get to a section like this. So really, I don't think anyone can be blamed if they weren't exactly tantalized by the thought of suffering through it all again in New Game Plus, just to partake in a fetch quest for gameplay that should have been front and center in even the earliest iterations of Mimic Secret. So when the anti-horror patented inventions of a Mascot horror genre conclude, what is left? The bare minimum. The Mimic shuffles around, you search for items, you flee the area to the next section. Towards the end of the game in the admin wing, the roller skating chunky chicken patrols an office filled with cupcake proximity alarms that alert it to your presence. These can, somehow, also kill you. At this point, my disbelief continues to be suspended, only because it's decided to hang itself from the ceiling. But, truest to the overarching problems of Mascot horror, I realised the greatest flaw of Mimic Secret, something any sensible human could discover at a mere glance, something that I knew to be the truth the moment I clicked New Game up until the credits rolled. The secret of the Mimic, struggle as it does, is not scary in the slightest. Many of you watching already know me by now. I'm the 20-something-year-old fruit bowl white boy masquerading as a dog PNG online in a desperate bid to siphon some of Shammy TV's clout for my own. Explaining this to you may be an exercise in futility. Knowing how well my videos typically do, it may not even inch past a few thousand views. But there's every chance the topical nature of a video will garner a couple new faces. For this reason, I'd like you to know the following. I am a massive wobbling pussy. It should be noted the propensity I have to find much of anything scary. Annoyingly, it's called into question just how good Soma was through its conventional horror when I'm predisposed to cowardice. After pondering it for some time, aligning it side by side with Mimic Secret, the distinction between the two became apparent regarding a specific encounter. Halfway through Soma, you stumble across a troublesome fellow known as Terry Akers. He is a warped monstrosity that has killed many of the staff in the facility and doesn't intend to stop with you. As you navigate a maze to reformat a key to the elevator, you're being stalked by this fleshy obelisk of doom. In the last segment of Mimic Secret, you enter a residential area established deep below the surface where where Edwin Murray likely stayed during long periods of tireless work. You have to collect film reels and use the corresponding numbers to open a door and escape. They're scattered across the house, all the while the mimic roams around searching for you. Mechanically, these two are roughly the same. You navigate enclosed claustrophobic spaces with limited room to evade a pursuing threat, which elevates the tension. The obvious distinction is that Acres is scary and the mimic isn't. There's a reason Acres has a compilation of YouTubers freaking out in response to him, and the mimic just has people reciting lyrics from a lolcow song. But why is that? Dear viewer, as always, I'm delighted to have the answer. Because horror games rely on a great onus relating to elements of presentation, a clever use of sound and visuals make or break them accordingly. The in-game consequence of being caught by a horror antagonist is worsened by how said consequence is presented. That's why jump scares in these games are to be considered the climax of accrued dread and tension. It is the punishment the player seeks to avoid because the visceral intensity of it is frightening to experience. The anticipation you're gonna get scared by it is distressing in of itself. That's why when Acres approaches, you're overwhelmed by dread. Sounds of electronic whirring becoming louder as he nears enunciates the imminent danger without a word spoken. The sight of his overgrown corpse shuffling through the empty halls, casting a towering silhouette against the dim light, pushes you back into the corner you're hiding in. The guttural chokes of his dormancy rise into deafening shrieks of mania when he realizes you're there, followed by the panic-inducing sound of his once sluggish steps thundering across the floor towards you. Acres is scary to compete with. For an enemy that is in the game for so little, he serves as a major highlight of its conventional horror. It may have been 3 years since I made a video on this game, but to this day, I haven't forgotten what Joseph Anderson did to the maiden honor of Soma. Mark my words, little Joseph, our battle will be legendary. Contrast this with the Mimic section. The house is an area comprised of claustrophobic rooms leading to dead ends. Aside from a few lockers and cupboards sporadically placed throughout, you have few places to hide if the Mimic corners you. You struggle to keep track of it, and that means every time you foray out of the safe room, you risk running right into it. The levels are compact, so running or jangling a chain above or below means it will hear you across the floors and bolt up the stairs. You're kept in uncomfortable proximity with a metal monolith that eerily regurgitates the lines of animatronics it impersonated throughout the game in an effort to kill you. Conceptually, this section could be really scary. Emphasis on could. Acres relied on noise to hunt you down, and ironically enough, the abundance of noise he makes meant it was just as easy to track him. The electronic whirring served as an unnerving proximity indicator. When he was nearby, his attentive hearing meant you had to pick a corner and stop moving at the peril of him sprinting right for you. Being able to track him through sound gave you a way to navigate the darkness of the maze whilst hampering you with a constant auditory reminder of his looming presence. Even when it was quiet, you were on edge anticipating his swift return from the opposite side. The Mimic, bafflingly, does not abide by this design. Regardless of where you are in the house, this thing constantly sounds like it is right next to you. I'd wait 10 minutes for the sound to fade and indicate I could turn a corner, just to see it emerge from a door miles away and realize it was upstairs the whole time. Okay, so it's... I'm sorry, you have to be hearing this audio, right? It was in that room, the adjoining room, and it's gone into basically the other side of the ground floor, and it sounds exactly the same. Part of me worried about bringing this up. It could be an intentional effort to disorient the player by depriving them of an important sense, but then I realized it randomly muffled the sound when in the vents, as it did countless times during the rest of the game. The intention clearly was to have a distinction in the sound to correspond with distance, but, true to form, it didn't work. What could have been a neat segment became genuinely grating as I listened to the Mimic repeatedly claim that it found me while concerning itself with a blank wall. I can already hear some of you typing. Smug, you said you didn't have any confounding bugs alter your experience, but this sounds like a pretty bad bug to me. Rule 1 of watching my videos, don't talk when I'm talking. Really, even if this had worked, the encounter lacked the accompanying tension and dread Acres section wields incredibly well. Throughout the game, there is hardly any ambience that serenades the Mimic's presence. Unease isn't created at all through elements of presentation. If the house fell still at times, or you had moments where you couldn't hear it anymore, you'd be left on edge. You wouldn't know if it was hiding somewhere in ambush, and that would keep you nervous to proceed. I'm sure it doesn't surprise you to know that in a game where they reveal the whole gimmick of the titular character before you even see it, not much is done at any point to serve as tangible tension. The sins here way greater than just one botched encounter. Mascot horror tends is itself in juxtaposition, that the sight of what we associate with the innocence of youth, like family restaurants and toy factories, becomes off-putting and frightening when instead serving the malevolent purpose of bashing your skull in. The first of this franchise proves there is merit to this idea. What Mimic Secret neglects to keep in mind is the uncanny valley the series crawled out from. The first game was scary because the plastic and metal countenances of gormless robots were unsettling. Seeing them immobile in the real world, regarding all around them with vacant stares, was an eerie experience that lent FNAF 1 a greater fear factor. It played off the twisted idea that these things could be alive and were just waiting to pounce. Their approach to your office was serenaded with unnerving sounds. They'd glare into your cameras while waiting outside your doors. If the power ran out, Freddy would stand in the doorway with music playing to relish the moment of your murder. Mimic Secret just can't compete when it lacks this horrifying imagery necessary to do so. Although I like the designs of the animatronics overall, I don't feel fear looking at them. The intended juxtaposition of a hairdresser dog running around a corner to kill me doesn't work, especially not in a brightly illuminated backstage area which describes basically every single zone you ever end up being in. Across the board, the elements of presentation throughout are picked almost in contravention of horror. There are moments where it feels like a joke is being played for the amusement of the player, like the voice in the elevator inadvertently calling you fat when a mimic jumps on top of it, or the repeated times Dispatch is an asshole at your expense. FNAF, since around Sister Location, has meddled with comedic tone, but it's always played as part of a balance with its horror. Sister Location wielded menace as well as humour. It says a lot that it would start the night with gags about bongos and Eggs Benedict before then transitioning into moments of tension. There are so many examples where, although they are scripted, there is horror spectacle aplenty. One particular moment is where you get caught by Foxy on your way to leave, and instead of getting a game over, you wake up inside a Springlock suit just to hear this.
That you never left the building last night. The cameras were searching for you, but they couldn't find you. I have you hidden too well. I kidnapped you.
Whether you have personal reservations about the gameplay section that followed this introduction, you can see there's a concerted effort on delivery. Horror loves a little bit of foreplay, and yet, somehow, Mimic Secret just never even tries to bother. How embarrassing it must be to forego horror in the name of humour, and to still not even get the laughs they kneecapped themselves for. The one time I felt I was in something resembling a horror game was when you enter the basement. There's no explanation of what's happening, no dialogue or cutscene, you just walk into a void and run towards lights while the spectre of a feline doll hunts you down. It kills you at random during the maze segments and you never really know why it does that, but at the very least, I felt uneasy. I was stranded in the dark, navigating a maze of desiccated animatronic suits while trying to avoid the one hunting me. This was the closest approximation of a horror experience you get throughout, and it occurred 3 solid hours into the game. Mimic Secret, up until the main ending where you crash your truck, runs for around 5 hours. As a wise man once said, this made me want to cut my fucking head off. Interestingly enough though, this is not the end of things. People may flag the fact I just excluded New Game Plus for my estimations, another go around of the game that grants you access to a special secret ending. Here's a curious detail to answer that concern. Even though some people don't care for its conventional horror elements, opting to instead play it as a walking simulator, there is a unanimous consensus that Soma weaves a compelling tale about the nature of human existence and its place in an age of rapid technological advancement. A big reason as to why it was scary was because of the context the story gave the player's actions. A secret ending for any game, and the value of pursuing it further, hinges off the existence of a worthwhile story. And even though I searched in every nook and cranny I could find, there's not an iota of a worthwhile story to be found. Typically in my videos, the longest chapter you'll find is the one pertaining to a game's story. In a medium where much of the gameplay elements are derivative of predecessors, it's the sentiments and meaning behind the title that conjure a specific identity. Some of the best games we know of that have formed cornerstones of our current online culture are renowned for how they narratively subvert our expectations of what the game will have us doing and what those actions mean for the fictional world we exist in. Stories give a game greater meaning and enrich what we already love about them. Without Undertale, the consequences of Toriel's existence inflate inflating the online value of furry BBW would be lost forever. Subverting expectations in my own twisted way, the story section of this video will lack the usual girth you've come to expect. The simplest reason is that, in order to talk about something, there has to be something worth talking about. And across all three endings, and the few hours necessary to reach them, I failed to find any indication of one's existence. The absence of any meaningful occurrence between start and end is especially irksome. The facility is empty, aside from you and the mimic, so the story focuses on the plight of the Murray family through audio recordings and found film footage. The genius inventor marries a woman he met at work, becomes the owner of the company, has a kid, and then suffers tragic bereavement by losing his wife before then losing his son. The tragedy is charitably assumed, of course, because this guy sounds barely bothered.
Oh, why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there. You were supposed to be here with me and David. Oh, how am I supposed to tell David that his mother is gone? How am I supposed to raise a kid on my own?
Yeah, you sound real fucking messed up about it, dude. Bro was all in on the life insurance plan. It's the only way he could afford the fucking magma power puzzles. Ascertaining much of any meaning is an incredibly nebulous challenge because recounting what I found in the game, as opposed to what I found on the wiki, is hard when both experiences felt identical. There's a noticeable lack of emotion to invoke any response in the player. At no point did I particularly feel sorry for Edwin or his family because nothing was ever established to regard them as living people, something more than MP3 files and MP4 animations suspiciously unable to show any human characters at any given time.
Okay, everyone hide. Fiona, go get him.
Everyone hide? There's no one there. Arnold, the protagonist, experiences no development of his own nor serves as a particularly interesting character in any way. That's not necessarily a first for FNAF. Right from the beginning, named protagonists were only ever intended to serve as vessels for the player. The attraction was the experience of fending off killer animatronics trying to get into your office and whack your nuts. But considering the absence of horror spectacle in the game, as well as the absence of gameplay posing a challenge or creating tension for the player, the focus has to go somewhere. Where the hell was it meant to go, if not the story? What the hell was the point of all these recordings and pieces of footage, if not to contribute to the creation of an involving tale? What the player has is the general frame of conflict without any of the emotion, sentimentality, or motivation that makes it interesting. Your boss's voice is mimicked by a robotic intelligence called the Cradle underneath the building, using the voice of Edwin's dead wife that manipulates you into getting the schematics. This is done because it doesn't want the blueprints to fall into another's hands, mainly the company you work for. It also is trying to contain the mimic and stop it from breaking free of the building. Something tells me that second part is easier said than done, because there comes a point where the mimic enters a Gundam and tears a hole through the ceiling to get to the rooftops, showing the ease of which it can escape at any given moment. But being the honest man I am, I regarded this with a charitable interpretation. Maybe the reason it wouldn't leave was because it also wanted the schematics for itself. That's why in the main ending, where you crash your truck while escaping the facility, the mimic yoinks the data diver doohickey that's carrying the schematics and warps off into the tree line. It didn't escape in its circus mech because it had a reason to stay. Reflecting on this now, it makes the story lack even more sense. If the mimic is also competing to swipe the data diver and its schematics from you, part of the reason the Cradle was desperate to stow them away when none could access it, and it knew to do this from as early as the Big Top Carnival section, why the hell does it spend the rest of the game trying to kill you at every possible opportunity before you have them? What does it gain from eliminating the sole method it has to access what it clearly wanted so badly at the end of the game? Maybe it just needed the data diver and it pursued you relentlessly so it could be stolen before killing you. Then you think of all the other technicians sent ahead, also likely with data divers, and you wondered why it didn't just use theirs the first time. It also evidently has little regard for the integrity of the device, considering how when it's in its circus mech, it drags you inside its bowels of grinding gears and shifting mechanisms that would crush both you and the thing it covets. The lazy answer to all of this would be it's simply impulsive. It doesn't know what it wants until it suddenly does, and it's the blatant convenience of this explanation that makes it so unimpressive. The mimic is simultaneously mindless enough to attack a random male animatronic that didn't do anything to instigate its fury, indicating it carries insatiable violent desire, which is also exposited right at the start of the game just to make sure no fun can be had with any of the concepts Steelwall tries to create, but then shows uncharacteristic mercy and spares Arnold for no obvious reason. The way it shields it against its chest shows it regards it with value, and the fact it didn't hesitate to swipe it from you means it knew what its mission was for at least some of the time. It's apparent this is something it already knew it wanted, so there wasn't a sudden realization of value that made it ignore Arnold here. It may be why the bad ending happens. The Mimic thought Arnold had the data diver, and realizing he didn't, dragged him back to the workshop and stuffed his corpse inside an animatronic suit, just like all the other technicians were in the vents. This then begs the question, why is the van here? Did it belong to one of the other technicians? Wow, it's really impressive how all Fazbear employees leave their van interiors appearing exactly identical to one another, down to the arrangement of empty drinks cans and pizza boxes strewn all over the place. Did the Mimic drive Arnold's van inside, and then realizing Arnold was going to the basement, drove it back outside so he could conveniently use it to escape later? That's some impressive agility on its part, considering it then has to go and hop into the destroyed circus mech and drag it all the way to the elevator shaft to pursue you minutes later. And then this really got me wondering, because how do the logistics of this even align? The Cradle is working against the Mimic, as established during the scene in the FNAF 1 prototype basement encounter, and its deceptive ploy to stop the Mimic accessing the schematics leads you to the truck in the garage. But there's one problem. The Cradle can't move. It's an immobile, high-tech computer machine below ground. So what other mobile entity exists to move the truck inside and then back outside if not the Mimic, its sworn opponent, and the whole reason this plan needs to be executed? What reason would the Mimic have not just to help the Cradle here, but to crawl inside the truck and wait to ambush Arnold instead of just being in the garage waiting for him anyway? It evidently knew he was going to be there. And where the hell was it hiding to do this whole reveal here? I thought it was on the roof at first and swung in from the side door, but because it's closed, it's implied it was here the whole time, just waiting to make an entrance. That concedes quite a knowing understanding of what it's doing, doesn't it? So is this thing a mindless marauder, or has it just got a sadistic streak? Does it need you to get into the executive office, or can it just open the doors itself, evident in how it follows you inside without needing a data diver to unlock the entrance both times? The real kicker here to all of this is there may be answers for some of these questions strewn about. Maybe if I did backtrack despite a lack of enticement on the game's behalf to do so in any way, I could have found notes and documents trying to reasonably justify the Mimic's schism of contrived motivations that conveniently service the plot. If that truly is the case, I must then ask the FNAF loyalists currently berating their keyboards with furious fingertips the following question. Why wasn't this information directly conveyed as part of the core plot? Why does it leave the engagement of its players to chance by assuming they'll want to spend time on this bland game finding answers to trivial questions? Why does it take such a confusing and ambivalent approach to establish fundamental aspects of a narrative that it cannot hope to succeed without? Why? Genuinely why does it potentially expect you to backtrack for this information while overwriting your progress with an autosave that can then prevent you from being able to go back and revisit these places? What the actual fuck is the thought process behind any of these almost arbitrary decisions that are being made to service an uninspired, generic, contrived plot that, even when padded with the boring filler, barely manages to achieve a playtime close to that of its contemporaries? The simplest answer is often the best answer, dear viewer. What defines the secret of the Mimic as a FNAF game is the iconic cart before the horse mentality the franchise wields to write its stories. Some of you probably just rolled your eyes at this whole segment. Wow, a FNAF game with no meaningful story. I'm glad we spent all this time building to such a grand unknown revelation, but you need to understand this finding emerges from what was a sincere attempt to engage. The concept of a story being told without holding your hand, leaving purposeful gaps to be filled with your own interpretation, isn't something I oppose inherently. Signalis is my favourite game, period, and a reoccurring joke in the community is absolutely no one understood what happened the whole time. Before Mimic's Secret was even a thought, FNAF games donned a similar open-ended approach. As some questions were answered, others took form, and it left the players stewing in thought to anticipate the answers the next game would provide. The unravelling mystery beckoned the attention of more people until it struck what professionals refer to as the Freddy Fazbear Event Horizon. Once MatPat's frenetic theorizing reached the masses by elevating the franchise's publicity, the theories started pouring in. Outlandish and ridiculous ideas flooded forums, restraint thrown by the wayside, as people people attempted to guess what came next for the series. This instigated an ideas arms race where Corfin would switch gears multiple times, retconning and rewriting numerous things in an attempt to ensure whatever the canon plot was would outperform the spectacle fans conjured up in their own heads. Through these efforts, the story also became outlandish and ridiculous. What was once the story of a serial killer stuffing dead children into animatronic suits became a cinematic universe of nonsense, purpose-fit to endlessly captivate audiences with interesting questions it became too scared to definitively answer. This gave rise to the colloquial portmanteau called Theorybait, a term denoting media existing to vaguely posit questions for the sake of meaningless intrigue that would never be satisfied. The Secret of the Mimic is one of those games. Mimic's secret doesn't tell a cohesive or coherent story and then use the enticing appeal of its core to encourage players to explore for more clues. It tears everything up into tiny little pieces and then casts them skyward, breaking apart the necessary foundation for narrative engagement in characters, story moments, or any themes it was trying to represent through the moon and sun imagery found in numerous places. It does this because it doesn't want to tell a story. It wants to sell you lore. The new internet word to mean a flurry of meaningless, arbitrary information that loves setting up vague concepts without honouring the responsibility of dealing with their consequences. It is packed with fictional trivia trying to stir up intrigue as part of a futile goal, provide exposition on an infinitely tiny part of a gargantuan tale that has already been haphazardly resolved a dozen times through its life. What does the story of the Mimic provide to the overarching story of FNAF, as scattered as it already is? How is it relevant to the horrible murders that are at its core? What purpose does it serve other than a glorified lore dump which, maddeningly, has been made redundant by a god-awful song released months prior with the lyrics "My name is Jackie, I'm fucking backy, What does it say about one's creative ability when you are to be outdone by fucking extra tuna? In all fairness, dear viewer, this game never really stood a chance. Before I smacked my head against the wall enough times to convince myself this was a good idea, I just beat the 4th chapter of Deltarune. These are two widely different games, both in terms of premise and quality, but one key similarity is that Deltarune also has a community frantically concocting theories about where the story ventures next. A popular current theory is your goat dad got drunk behind the wheel and slammed his Ford F-150 into the daughter of his college friend, prompting her to become the major antagonist of the game. The memes of this are simply endless. Within a couple days of beating Deltarune, this gif was plastered everywhere across Twitter. I shit you not, I was just scrolling through my bookmarks to find those animations, and I stumbled across this, like... The crucial difference, though, is why these communities theorize. Deltarune players became so lovingly obsessed with the presence of a rich emotional story that they wanted to search further. There was a prevailing fixation on its significance that drove them to search through file names and going frame by frame through animations, not because of a random promise it could mean something, but because the narrative chops of the game showed it already meant something. FNAF players' individual enjoyment of a little story they're provided is still being outsourced to the vicarious experience of watching YouTube videos where they are forced to absorb 50 hours of Dorko passing through supplementary reading critically because there is nothing to entice players to bother continuing themselves. Even with a complete understanding, what you get is the bare minimum, the bog standard. What is a mountain to the Mascot horror genre is a molehill to everyone else. Some people may think I'm applying undue scrutiny to what is, at this point, a kid's game. I'm rocking up to a reading of The Hungry Caterpillar and complaining it's not Hemingway. This is baby's first horror game. The original FNAF games were also graded around the teenage category, and the audiences of the many YouTubers who gave it publicity were part of that target market. That's why arguments online about whether the franchise ever wielded a maturity in its content continue to this day. However, the original FNAF games not only offered a unique gameplay loop of being immobilized while surrounded by peril, as well as the infamous challenge of beating its max difficulty settings, they were also priced to reflect these experiences. Many of the original games, and those that followed, were priced at under £10. Even for titles with respective issues, they had atmosphere, tension, unease. They were horror games. What we have now simply isn't, and that's not because Steel Wool have tried to do something new here. I've seen people posit in some places the idea that the backlash towards Steel Wool's FNAF titles is owed to simple nostalgia grievances, that because it's trying to do something new, people are inevitably going to hate it for that alone and find justifications to dislike it afterwards. Although I can see that being true for some detractors, it's certainly not for me, and I think this sort of explanation defeats itself inherently because it's a bit hard to claim people hate Mimic's secret for doing something new new when Steel Wool is not doing anything new. Steel Wool sought to break free of the chair's linear immobility, wanting to widen the scope of the horror the games could provide, but in the end all they have achieved is Furry Outlast, a gameplay loop not innovated upon since the 2010s, but is differentiated only by how much lewd art is drawn of the antagonists.
I will fuck the shit out of that robot, man. I'm not even...
Despite claiming to offer so much more than being in a security office, Mimic Secret offers so much less than its predecessors. If it's intended to be a kid's game, why is it so deliberately confusing and difficult to understand? Why is it so uninteresting and incapable of grabbing the player's attention even at the beginning of the game? The answer? Because, regardless of what you insist the audience is, it doesn't work. For what is being chased by an uninteresting antagonist through scripted sequences towards an ending that requires your investment in a substantial amount of nothing for the next few years, they seriously want to charge you this much for this little. The insult to injury is, at this high of a price bracket, it is still outdone by cheaper games with twice what Mimic Secret has to offer. Signalis, £15. Inscription, under £20. Outlast, £12. Soma, £25. Darkest Dungeon, £20. Outer Wilds, £20. Chicory, A Colourful Tale, under £20. Lease of a Painful, £20. Deltarune, £20. Behind these games and their stories is a prevailing creative vision, lovingly presenting their hard work through the interactive medium. These games are not all part of the same genre, sure, but the principle still remains. A good game transcends the limitations of its genre. The secret of the Mimic's main problem is it can't seem to escape it, nor can it escape the clutches of a franchise dragging it down. Looking at the Steam page and sifting through reviews, a lot of positive ones mention how it is imperfect, but they like it enough to recommend. Many of them mention the frequency of which you get soft-locked or hit a game-breaking bug that forces a restart, but, in the same breath, say that what's beyond the technical issues is worth enduring through. Hell, some reviews mention it's just not worth the full price and people ought to wait for a sale. This, of course, is not including the volumes of positive reviews that are just quoting the secret of a Mimic song. I think the reason why so many are quick to embrace the game and claim it's worthwhile is the same reason you still have loads of people flocking to the most recent Call of Duty. Nostalgia. A lot of people grew up and had definitive moments of their life at the same time these games were in their prime, sometimes even while playing them or watching others play them. For myself, the first few FNAF games up to Pizzeria Simulator released while I was in high school. I remember the numerous times I'd come home and sit on my bed watching 8-Bit Ryan on my iPad. There's an ironclad association between these fleeting memories of youth and the remains of what was once wholly loved by so many. Now, I'm not going to strawman that every single person here who maybe still likes Mimic Secret after playing it is just trying to claw back better days long gone. Guilty pleasures exist, you can like things while acknowledging their flaws. That said, I think it would be remiss to say that the legacy of FNAF and the unspoken aspiration to return to said better days isn't ever present, and tantalizing people with the thought maybe, just maybe, it might come back. There's something to be noted that a video talking about FNAF as if only the first game existed garnered so many views on such a small channel, releasing just days before Mimic Secret launched. I think there's also something to be said that while most positive reviews are partial concessions to the less than stellar state of the game, or just outright random memes, the negative reviews are all walls of text containing meticulously reasoned arguments for their justified dislike of it. There's a bit of an indication that the negative reviews are written, really, by the only people paying attention to what they're playing. For all I have done to take a hammer to the secret of a Mimic, I don't think it's lazy or born from a cynical disregard for the potential significance of games. Really what I loathe is the arrogance of what it asks people to cough up. Video game developers do not occupy a vacuum. The space around them is constantly changing and they have inspirations, so they're knowledgeable of their predecessors. So to have looked around the room and seen all these games offering way more for way less and to still charge as much as they do is kind of insulting. It can be hard sometimes to peer past that and the way it exacerbates the problems I take with everything said before, but really, there are things I enjoy about this game. The hand interactions are a vestige of when this was originally intended for VR, but I enjoy the extra layer to the interactivity. The design of the data diver is genuinely cool. The thought that you could go back to previous areas and that this is part of the game's secret ending is neat. And admittedly, the scene where the marauding Mimic reduces to the size of a young boy and climbs into bed before deactivating forever struck a genuine emotional chord for a fleeting second. Seeing this killer machine shrunk by the vulnerability of its own incomplete home and excitedly taking a plush toy into its harsh metal arms was actually a little moving. There is work here. To pretend there isn't is to waste our time justifying a petty dislike. This video wasn't made to vent a performative contrarian opinion for ragebait, like discrediting the earned successes of Repo and Lethal Company with a made-up word like friendslob.
You're so stupid, you're stupid!
Really, it's to mourn the potential of this game. There are great concepts behind the Mimic's gameplay contributions and the thought-out environment hosting your encounters with it that are painful to see not fully realized. I think if it had the freedom to spread its wings and explore its own story, this could have had the slimmest of chances to be a good game. Potentially, even a great one. The problem is that Steel Wool will continue to serve as the designated punching bag for FNAF's failures, through their own fault or otherwise, because the brand recognition is just too good to give up. They are a business. Who would say no to a free money printer with free online marketing to boot? Any potential their own stories could have will always need to make room to be a footnote in the annals of a convoluted and contrived story that's been collecting dust for years now. To open up a new narrative front in the endless war FNAF wages in the pursuit of eternal relevancy, promising ideas made expendable not because they could be done better as part of FNAF's story, but because it will better appeal to the wallets of fans who leave positive reviews bereft of any specific mention of what the developers worked hard on. Regardless of whether you like it or dislike it, The Secret of the Mimic is a game that just doesn't work. It may not be wholly terrible, but it's definitely not good either. It's just bland. What will define this game in years to come won't be the value it holds as a piece of interactive art, but really the absence of £33.50 in your bank account. This is why The Secret of the Mimic just doesn't work.
Huh. Well, that was a waste of time. Alright, I'm out of here. Had enough of this weird place. Huh. Odd. I could have sworn that this wasn't open when I... What the fuck is that?
And now we come to contemplate the most important question. Why was this game made? A tax write-off? Owing a favour to powerful people? Or is this whole game just a convoluted excuse to justify the existence of a pyrocynical commission? Hello dear viewer, it's 3 AM on a Monday morning and I'm working to finish this video right now, but let me tell you, despite that, I've had a blast of it. This has been a lot of fun to work on during times where I'm not endlessly fretting over the book series, and despite that this has a more negative tone towards what I'm talking about, I had a great time putting my thoughts together and reasoning through why I felt this way, and I hope that even for people who may not agree with me by the end of this, they'll appreciate the effort that's gone into it, and hopefully people will understand this isn't me just trying to cash in on rage bait. I do genuinely believe in what I'm saying, and I hope I reasoned it well enough, at least. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank all of you for 10,000 subscribers. That's surreal. It's crazy to even say. This video isn't the 10k milestone celebration. That will be coming shortly on its own, after I finish up with the book series, and then finally have my hands free, so I'll be a lot more cheesy and insufferable about it soon. Until then, I hope this will tide you over. For the time being, I'm hoping you stay well, and again, thank you very much for watching until the end. Take it easy. Thank you.